If you listen to the official story coming out of Washington today, the operation in Caracas was a triumph, a master stroke of justice, a drug lord in handcuffs, a mission accomplished. On the surface, it looks like a victory. It feels like a return to strength. But feeling good is not the same as being smart. And tactical dominance is not the same as strategic power. What we actually witnessed was not a simple police action. It was the demolition of the very rules that have kept the United States safe for the last 70 years. We just traded a generation of diplomatic credibility for a 30-second headline. We are teaching the world that sovereignty is dead, and that raw power is the only law that matters. And that is a lesson that will inevitably be used against us. We need to stop looking at the raid and start looking at the precedent. We need to talk about the cost of a foreign policy that spends authority faster than it can earn it.
My name is Akira Matsuda. On this channel, we don't do cheerleading, and we don't do partisan outrage. We do reality. If you want to understand the actual mechanics of American power and where this road leads, hit that subscribe button right now. Let's look at what we really lost in Venezuela. If you look at the headlines, if you scan the chyrons scrolling across the cable news networks, the story is simple. It is clean. It is satisfying. A criminal organization has been decapitated. A dictator, long accused of turning his nation into a narcotics superhighway, has been removed from power and brought to face justice. On the surface, this looks like a victory for the rule of law. It feels like a reassertion of American capability. For 24 hours, that is the only story you have been told. It is a story designed to make you feel secure. It frames the events in Caracas not as an invasion, not as a regime change operation, but as a high-stakes police raid. It invites you to view the United States military not as a belligerent force entering a sovereign capital, but as the ultimate SWAT team executing a warrant that was long overdue. And if you stop thinking there, if you accept that framing without scratching the surface, it works. It feels justified. Who defends a cartel? Who defends a despot? The moral clarity is seductive. But we need to stop looking at the headline and start looking at the structure. Because what happened in Caracas was not a police action. It was not a counter-narcotics operation in any traditional sense. To call it that is not just a simplification, it is a deception. When we talk about counter-narcotics, we are talking about interdiction. We are talking about seizing shipments in international waters. We are talking about cooperation with local authorities, however strained that cooperation might be. We are talking about the slow, grinding work of intelligence and extradition treaties. That is not what happened here. What we witnessed was the unilateral projection of American military force into the capital city of a sovereign nation to physically extract a sitting head of state.
Let that sink in. This was not a capture on the high seas. This was not a covert operation to snatch a terror suspect from a safe house in a failed state where no government exists. This was the utilization of overwhelming military assets to decapitate a government inside its own borders, without a declaration of war, without a United Nations mandate, and without the legal architecture that has governed international relations for the last 70 years. The administration is calling this law enforcement. They are using the language of criminal justice, indictments, warrants, trafficking charges. They do this because law enforcement is a comfortable category. It implies that we are simply applying rules that everyone agrees on. It implies that the United States is merely the sheriff enforcing the law in a rough neighborhood.
But law enforcement relies on jurisdiction. It relies on the idea that the authority acting has the legal right to be there. When a police officer kicks down a door, he does so with a warrant signed by a judge who has jurisdiction over that territory. The United States has no jurisdiction over the presidential palace in Venezuela. So when we strip away the comforting language of fighting drugs, what are we actually looking at? We are looking at the weaponization of the American legal system to justify a military conquest. We are watching the executive branch take the immense, unchecked power of the U.S. military and drape it in the clothing of a district attorney. This is a profound shift. It is a blurring of lines that were drawn for a reason. Historically, the United States has been very careful to distinguish between war and crime. War is a state of conflict between nations. It has rules. It has beginnings, and it has ends. Crime is a violation of law, handled by courts and police. By treating a foreign head of state as a criminal suspect, and then using military force to arrest him, we have created a hybrid monster. We are claiming the rights of a belligerent to invade, to occupy, to use lethal force, while claiming the moral immunity of a police officer. We are saying that we do not need to declare war because we are just enforcing the law. But whose law? Ours. This is where the comfort begins to evaporate. If this were standard operating procedure, we would see it happening elsewhere. We would see a consistent application of this principle. But we don't. We don't see U.S. Special Forces extracting leaders from other nations that traffic in illicit goods or violate human rights, provided those leaders are useful to us. This is not the application of a universal law. It is the selective application of imperial power, justified by a legal technicality. Think about the precedent this sets. We have authorized ourselves to enter any nation at any time to remove any leader, provided we can first produce a domestic indictment against them. Do you understand how low that bar is? A federal prosecutor can indict a ham sandwich. An indictment is an accusation, not a verdict. Yet we have just established that an accusation, generated entirely within our own political and legal system, is sufficient grounds to launch a de facto invasion of another country. This removes the friction of war. It removes the need for congressional approval. It removes the need for international coalitions. It tells the American public that we aren't going to war. War is messy. War is expensive. War is controversial. No, we are just arresting the bad guys. It is a marketing triumph. But structurally, it is a disaster. It suggests that boundaries no longer matter. It suggests that sovereignty is conditional, and the condition is our approval. Some will say, but he was a criminal. He was destroying his country. That may be true, but the mechanism we use to address that matters. When you use the military to enforce domestic law on foreign soil, you are not policing, you are conquering. And the moment you realize that, the operation changes shape in your mind. You stop seeing a drug bust. You stop seeing a victory for justice. You start seeing a superpower that has decided it no longer needs to explain itself to the world, or even to its own constitution. You see a power that has decided that might makes right, as long as we file the paperwork first. The framing of this as a law enforcement operation is a lie. It is a comforting lie, designed to keep you from asking the hard questions
about what it means for the United States to act as judge, jury, and executioner on a global scale without anyone else's permission.
And once you see through that lie, you cannot unsee it. You are no longer watching a routine news story. You are watching the dismantling of the international order, disguised as a perp walk. Let's be clear about one thing right now, because I don't want there to be any confusion about the operational reality. The United States can do this. Militarily, tactically, logistically, there is no other nation on earth that could execute what just happened in Caracas. To fly undetected into a hostile capital, neutralize a presidential guard, extract a target, and vanish before the sun comes up? That is a capability that borders on science fiction. If the metric for success is simply, can we grab the guy, then yes, we are the undisputed champions of the world. But this isn't a video game. You don't get points for the degree of difficulty. In geopolitics, the question isn't whether you can do something. The question is what happens after you do it.
And this is where the celebration stops. This is where the tactical brilliance reveals a strategic void. Because when you use power this bluntly, without a plan, without a coalition, without a framework that the rest of the world accepts, you are not investing your strength, you are spending it. You are burning political capital that took decades to accumulate, all for a 30-second clip on the evening news. Look away from Caracas for a moment. Look at who else was watching this operation. Look at Brazil. Look at Mexico. Look at Colombia. For the last 30 years, the United States has spent billions of dollars trying to convince these nations that we are partners. We have signed treaties. We have built trade agreements. We have preached the gospel of sovereignty and mutual respect. We told them that the days of gunboat diplomacy were over, that we were all playing by the same rules. In one night, we lit a match and burned that credibility to the ground. What do those leaders see today? They don't see a partner helping to clean up the neighborhood. They see a superpower that reserves the right to kidnap their citizens and decapitate their governments whenever Washington feels like it. They see that their sovereignty is not a right, it is a lease, held at the pleasure of the United States. And what happens when your neighbors stop trusting you? They don't attack you. They don't declare war. They simply stop helping. The next time we need intelligence on a terror cell in the Amazon, the phone doesn't get answered. The next time we need a trade route secured, the paperwork gets lost. The next time we need a vote in the UN against a real adversary, they abstain. We have traded a generation of diplomatic leverage for a single tactical trophy. But it gets worse. Look at our actual adversaries. Look at Beijing. Look at Moscow. You might think they would be outraged. You might think they would be condemning this violation of international law. Oh, they're issuing statements, sure. They're feigning shock. But behind closed doors, they are popping champagne. Because we just handed them the greatest gift they could ask for. Precedent. China wants to move on Taiwan. Russia wants to push further into Eastern Europe. Until yesterday, the United States could stand on the moral high ground and say, "You cannot violate the sovereignty of your neighbors. It is against the rules." And now? Now they can look us in the eye and say, "We are just doing what you did in Venezuela. We are just securing our interests. We are just enforcing our laws." We have stripped the gears of the argument. We have normalized the idea that big powers can eat small powers if they have a grievance. We have removed the moral architecture that constrained our enemies, just so we could flex a muscle in our own backyard.
This is what happens when you confuse force with power. Force is the ability to break things. Power is the ability to get what you want without having to break things. By acting alone, by acting without a strategy, we have demonstrated immense force, but we have revealed a terrifying lack of power. We have shown the world that we have no patience for diplomacy, no respect for allies, and no fear of consequences. That sounds tough. It sounds strong. But in the long run, it is brittle. A superpower that relies entirely on coercion is a superpower that is running out of options. Every time you have to kick down a door, it means you failed to get it opened any other way. Every time you have to use the military to solve a political problem, it means your diplomats have failed. We are entering a period where the United States is going to be feared, yes, but we are going to be isolated. We are going to find that the cost of doing business in the world just went up. The alliance tax just got higher. The cooperation premium just skyrocketed. We are acting like a rich man who thinks he can treat everyone poorly because he has the biggest bank account. But political capital is not infinite. You can go bankrupt. And looking at the wreckage of our diplomatic standing this morning, looking at the silence from our allies and the smirk on the faces of our adversaries, you have to ask yourself a very uncomfortable question. We got the man, but what did we lose to get him? We didn't just spend ammunition in Caracas. We spent trust. We spent legitimacy. We spent the benefit of the doubt. And those are resources you cannot reprint. We are borrowing against our future stability to pay for a moment of present satisfaction. And eventually, the bill comes due. To understand how we got here, we have to stop looking at the map of South America and start looking at the machinery of Washington. We need to talk about the boring, unsexy architecture that keeps the American superpower from driving off a cliff. For 70 years, the projection of American power was designed to be difficult. That was a feature, not a bug. If a president wanted to send troops into a foreign capital, there was a process. He had to go to Congress. He had to consult with the National Security Council. He had to get lawyers from the State Department, the Pentagon, and the Department of Justice in a room to argue about legality, about precedent, about the day-after consequences. That friction was intentional. It was designed to ensure that when America moved, it moved with the full weight of the nation, not just the impulse of one man. It was designed to filter out bad ideas, to temper reckless instincts, and to ensure that short-term actions didn't destroy long-term interests. What we are witnessing right now, what Caracas represents, is the dissolution of that architecture. We are watching a specific kind of political acid eat through the institutional brakes of the United States. You can call it Trumpism. You can call it executive unilateralism. You can call it whatever you want. But we need to identify its properties, because it is dissolving the difference between the national interest and the president's personal will. This governing logic views institutions not as assets, but as obstacles. It looks at the State Department and sees disloyalty. It looks at the intelligence community and sees a deep state trying to slow things down. It looks at Congress and sees a nuisance. It looks at international law and sees a joke. In this worldview, the only legitimate source of authority is the executive's instinct, the deal, the
the transaction. And when you apply that logic to the military, things get dangerous very quickly. The operation in Venezuela was not the product of a deliberative strategy. It was the product of a worldview that says, I have the biggest military in history, why can't I use it? It is a worldview that believes legal constraints are for sucker nations, not for us. This is why there was no coalition. Building a coalition takes time. It requires compromise. It requires convincing others that you are right. Trumpism does not persuade, it asserts. This is why there was no congressional debate. Debate implies that the president might be wrong. It implies that the people's representatives have a say in where our sons and daughters are sent to fight. By bypassing these checks, we are not making America more efficient. We are making it more volatile. We are removing the shock absorbers from the vehicle right before we drive off-road. And the tragedy is that this approach is often sold as America first. It is sold as being tough. But look closely at what it actually does to us. When the world sees that American foreign policy is no longer based on values or treaties or consistent interests, but is instead based on the transactional whims of the executive branch, they stop investing in a relationship with America. They start trying to buy favor with the leader. We cease to be a republic acting on the world stage, and we become a court. Foreign policy becomes about flattery. It becomes about who can offer the best short-term deal to the man in the White House. This degrades us. It corrupts the very essence of American power, which was supposed to be about something bigger than any one administration. When we use the military to solve a political problem in a way that bypasses our own democratic institutions, we are validating the way dictatorships operate. We are saying that power is its own justification. Caracas is not an anomaly. It is a prototype. It is a proof of concept for a new way of doing business, where the Department of Justice is used to write permission slips for military adventures, and where the military is treated not as the shield of the Republic, but as the personal sword of the President. This is the strategic solvent at work. It dissolves trust. It dissolves continuity. It dissolves the checks and balances that separate a democracy from a regime. So do not make the mistake of thinking this is about whether you like the president or hate him. Do not make the mistake of thinking this is about whether Maduro was a bad guy. This is about the machinery of the United States government. We are watching the safety guards being removed, one by one. We are watching a system being retooled to serve the impulse of the moment rather than the security of the future. And once you break those institutional seals, you cannot easily put them back on. We are creating a presidency that is unbound, unanswerable, and terrifyingly free to make mistakes that the rest of us will have to pay for. The operation in Venezuela wasn't just a raid on a foreign country. It was a raid on the American Constitution. And right now, it looks like the raid was successful. We have established a new baseline. The president can do what he wants, where he wants, provided he frames it as a win. And if that is the new standard, then we are no longer the nation we thought we were. We are something else, something much more fragile and much more dangerous to itself. So, where does this leave us? When the parade ends, when the adrenaline fades, when the news cycle moves on to the next crisis, We are going to be left with the cold mathematics of what we have done. And the math is unforgiving. We need to talk about the cost curve. Not the financial cost. Money can be printed. I'm talking about the strategic cost. I'm talking about the narrowing of the American horizon. For decades, the United States operated on a principle that set us apart from every empire that came before us. We operated on the principle of consent. We built a world order where nations followed our lead, not just because they were afraid of our tanks, but because they trusted our word. They trusted that we were bound by the same rules we enforced. That trust was a currency. It was the most valuable asset in the American arsenal. It meant we didn't always have to use force. It meant we could pick up the phone and get things done. It meant that when we spoke, the world listened, not out of panic, but out of respect for the system we built. In Caracas, we didn't just spend that currency, we burned it. And now we enter the phase of diminishing returns. Because here is the trap we have set for ourselves. When you stop relying on legitimacy, you have to rely entirely on coercion. When you tear up the rule book, you can no longer blow the whistle when someone else fouls you. Think about the position we are in tomorrow morning. If we want to condemn a Russian incursion into the Baltics, our words ring hollow. If we want to rally a coalition against Chinese expansion in the South China Sea, our partners will hesitate. They will wonder if they are signing up for a defense of law or just a defense of American caprice. We have lowered the threshold for chaos. We have validated the behavior of the very regimes we claim to oppose. We have told the world that sovereignty is a fiction and that only strength matters. And in a world where only strength matters, you have to be strong everywhere, all the time, forever. You cannot blink. You cannot rest. You cannot stumble. That is an exhausting way to exist. It is an expensive way to lead. We are moving toward a future where the United States is more powerful than ever, but less influential than ever. We are becoming a fortress, safe perhaps behind our walls and our weapons, but isolated. We will find that we have fewer friends and more dependents. We will find that we have to bribe nations to do what they used to do for free. We will find that every diplomatic problem now looks like a military nail because we threw away the hammer of diplomacy. This is the false economy of unilateralism. It feels efficient in the moment. It feels like getting things done. But it creates a world where every single interaction is a struggle for dominance. And the tragedy is that this damage is cumulative. You cannot simply hit a reset button. You cannot go back to the world and say, "Just kidding, we respect international law again." Credibility takes a lifetime to build and an afternoon to destroy. We have crossed a line, and the bridge behind us is burning. So do not look at this operation as a victory. Look at it as a down payment on a much darker, much lonelier future. We have proven we can act without the world. Now, we are going to have to live in it. The United States is entering an era where we will be feared, we will be watched, but we will no longer be followed. And for a nation that once led the free world, that is not a victory. That is a resignation. The operation is over, but the consequences? They are just beginning.